The day my son died, my world collapsed. My wife left with her lover, taking all the money, while my in-laws openly called me a pathetic freeloader. They didn't know that behind this seemingly impoverished exterior, I quietly held enough power to turn their lives upside down. And when the time comes, those who scorned me will have to bow before the truth that I was never a failure. Hello, my name is Grayson Reed. I'm 38 years old, living in Wichita, Kansas, in a well-kept house situated in an upscale suburban neighborhood, shaded by ancient oak trees and surrounded by neatly trimmed green lawns. From the outside, anyone would think I'm a lucky man with an enviable life. But if you step into my world, you'll see that things aren't as shiny as they appear. I work at the city's finance department, an ordinary office job, repetitive like the ticking of a clock. Every morning I wake up at 6, brew a cup of coffee in my spacious kitchen, and prepare a few slices of dry toast for breakfast. I put on a worn-collared white shirt, pants bought years ago, and drive my old beat-up Ford pickup truck to work. That truck with its peeling paint and rumbling engine is my faithful companion. It's not flashy, but I love its simplicity, just like the way I live. People look at me, colleagues, neighbors, and especially my wife's family, and shake their heads thinking I'm an ordinary man, a nobody with nothing special to offer. They don't know that I choose simplicity, not because I have no other options. I'm not the type to show off. I prefer quiet moments, like sitting on the porch in the evening, listening to the wind rustling through the distant wheat fields. But deep inside, I carry a smoldering flame. Not anger, but something resolute, powerful, waiting for the right moment to ignite. I've learned to suppress it, not because I'm weak, but because I have a reason to live, to endure. My small family, or more precisely, my 7-year-old son Daniel. Daniel was the only light in my dark world. He had messy brown hair and clear blue eyes, like the Kansas sky on a summer day. Daniel was gentle, well-behaved, and had a special passion for drawing. Watching him draw soothed my heart. Every stroke of his pencil was a reminder that I had to keep going, to preserve this home, even as it cracked day by day. My wife, Amanda Collins, is my complete opposite. At 33, she manages a high-end hotel in downtown Wichita. Amanda is beautiful, intelligent, and carries a confidence I once admired. When we first married, she was a gentle woman, always greeting me with a warm smile when I came home. But over time, that light in her eyes faded. Perhaps it was the influence of her parents, Charles and Linda, who never accepted me. For about a year now, Amanda has looked at me with cold, distant eyes, sometimes tinged with contempt. She often compared me to the successful men she met at the hotel, men who drove luxury cars, wore expensive suits, and talked about million-dollar investments. I listened, but didn't respond. I knew she thought I wasn't good enough, unworthy of her or her family. But I stayed silent, not wanting her mocking words to destroy what little remained between us. Besides Amanda, I also faced significant pressure from her parents, Charles and Linda Collins. They are the embodiment of arrogance. Charles, 65, is a wealthy real estate businessman who owns numerous buildings and plots of land in Wichita. The house my wife, son, and I live in is one of his properties. Charles is a tall man, always dressed in tailored suits with a smug smile as if the world lies at his feet. To him, I'm nothing but a freeloader, a poor man who got lucky by marrying his daughter. Every time we meet, he never misses a chance to remind me that the house I live in belongs to him, that I should be grateful for being allowed to stay there. Linda, my mother-in-law, is no less haughty. At 61, she runs a prestigious art gallery where Wichita's elite gather to spend money on paintings whose value I could never comprehend. Linda lives extravagantly, from her designer handbags to the monthly wine tasting parties she hosts. She looks at me like a stain on her expensive rug, always finding ways to mock my humble background. "Grayson, have you ever thought about doing something bigger?" she once asked, her tone sweet but sharp as a knife. I've grown used to their mockery. They're like small cuts. Not enough to kill me, but enough to make me ache every day. I don't respond, not because I have nothing to say, but because my time hasn't come yet. Over the years, I've been quietly preparing. I'm not just the lowly finance clerk they think I am. I've spent countless nights while the house slept, studying markets, investing in stocks, real estate, and projects no one would suspect. I don't boast, and I don't need anyone to know. But I know that one day all the contempt I've endured will come at a price. Every day I wake up with the single goal: to keep my small family intact. But everything began to crack on a Saturday morning when the early autumn sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden streaks across the kitchen floor. Daniel was sitting at breakfast, stirring his bowl of cereal with a spoon, but I noticed he looked tired. His eyes no longer sparkled as they usually did, and his small hand holding the spoon trembled slightly. "Are you okay, Daniel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite my heart starting to race. He only nodded, giving a faint smile. "I have a bit of a headache, Dad," he said. I thought it was just a common cold. I gave him a painkiller and told him to rest, but by noon Daniel collapsed in the living room, his face pale and his eyes tightly shut. My heart stopped. I shouted for Amanda, but she wasn't home. I scooped Daniel up, his small body terrifyingly light in my arms, and rushed to the car. The old pickup truck roared as I floored the gas, speeding straight to Wichita's Central Hospital. In the emergency room, doctors surrounded Daniel, the cold white lights illuminating his face. I stood in the hallway, clenching my fists, praying desperately. "He'll be fine," I told myself, but a bad feeling clung to me like a shadow. After hours of waiting, a doctor approached, his eyes heavy. "Mr. Reed, we've run tests. Your son has a brain tumor. It's very serious." It felt like the floor beneath me gave way. "A brain tumor?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "But Daniel has always been healthy. How could—" The doctor explained, his tone even but cold. The tumor had grown silently and was now in a late stage, untreatable. "We'll do everything we can," he said. But I knew it was just a comforting lie. I called Amanda, my voice breaking over the phone. "Amanda, our son is sick. He's in the hospital. Can you come back right away?" She was silent for a moment, then replied curtly, "I'm in a meeting. I'll be there as soon as I can." But her "as soon as" was nearly midnight, after I had sat by Daniel's bedside for 10 hours. He lay there, frail, with IV lines in his arms. I held his hand, whispering words of encouragement, though I was breaking inside. "Dad's here, Daniel. I'm not going anywhere." The days that followed passed like a nightmare. I barely left the hospital, dozing off in the chair beside Daniel's bed, only waking when he called for me. I worried about hospital bills, running back and forth between payment counters and his room, trying to keep everything under control. Amanda showed up a few times, but she was always in a hurry, citing work or saying she couldn't handle the pressure. Each time she left, leaving me alone in the cold hospital room, I felt a growing void between us. She was no longer the wife who held my hand through tough times, no longer the mother who sang lullabies to Daniel each night. Now she was a stranger with empty eyes and perfunctory words. My in-laws, Charles and Linda, visited only twice. The first time, Charles stood at the door of the hospital room, arms crossed, looking at me as if I were to blame for everything. "Did you take the boy for regular checkups, Grayson?" he asked, his voice icy. "If you had, maybe this could have been caught earlier." Linda said nothing, just looked at Daniel with red-rimmed eyes before turning away, as if she couldn't bear the sight. The second time they came, Linda brought an expensive bouquet of flowers, hastily placed it on the table, and left after a few minutes. Not a word of comfort, not a touch of support, just accusing glances, as if I were the failure who couldn't protect my own son. Daniel, though growing weaker each day, still tried to smile at me. Once he gripped my hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I want to go home. To finish my drawing." I choked up, promising him I'd take him home soon. But deep down, I knew that promise might never come true. After 3 weeks of fighting, Daniel took his last breath. I still remember that evening vividly. The moonlight outside was full and bright. I sat by Daniel, telling him stories about the wheat fields we used to run through. He smiled, but his breaths were so weak I had to lean close to hear him. "Dad, I love you," he whispered. I held his hand tightly, tears streaming down my face. "I love you too, Daniel. I'll always love you." Then in that moment, I felt his small hand go limp. The machines beside him began to beep frantically. Nurses rushed in, but I knew Daniel was gone forever. I held him tightly, his small body now cold in my arms. "Daniel, my boy," I cried out, tears falling as I called his name in desperation. But he didn't answer. The light in his bright blue eyes was gone. I broke down. The world around me shattered into pieces. Daniel was my reason for living, the only hope that kept me standing against the Collins family's contempt. Now, with him gone, I felt I had nothing left. I blamed myself. If I had taken him for a checkup sooner, if I had been stronger, would Daniel still be here? Those questions cut into my heart like knives, relentless and unforgiving. Amanda stood in the corner of the room watching me hold Daniel, but her eyes were cold, distant, as if she were looking at a stranger. She didn't come closer, didn't touch me, didn't share my grief. She just stood there, then turned away, saying she needed air. I watched her walk away, feeling like the entire world had turned its back on me. 3 days later, Daniel's funeral was held quietly at a small church on the outskirts of Wichita. I stood by his tiny coffin, clutching his unfinished drawing, a picture of a wheat field with our family holding hands. That drawing was his final goodbye to me. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues came to offer their condolences, hugging me and speaking words of genuine comfort. But the Collins family, Charles and Linda, stood at a distance, their eyes cold. Charles whispered something to Linda, and I caught fragments. "If Grayson had money, maybe the boy could have been treated at a better hospital." Linda nodded, adding, "He was never capable of taking care of a family." Amanda stood beside them, silent. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word to defend me. She let her parents humiliate me in front of everyone as if I wasn't worth protecting. I gripped Daniel's drawing tightly, a wave of humiliation and pain surging within me. In that moment, standing at my son's funeral amidst pitying glances and mocking words, I made a vow to myself. I would no longer let myself be trampled on. In the days following the funeral, I was like a soulless shell. Each morning, I woke up in the large but cold house once filled with Daniel's laughter. Now there was only the ticking of the clock and a heavy silence pressing down on me. I tried to cling to work to forget the pain. At the finance department, I sat in front of the computer screen, entering data, checking reports, but my mind was elsewhere. I saw Daniel in every small corner, his smile when he ran to greet me, his clear voice calling "Dad." I kept his drawing, the wheat field with the three of us holding hands, taped to my desk as a way to keep him close. But every time I looked at it, my heart ached, as if sliced by an invisible blade. Amanda, on the other hand, quickly returned to her glamorous life, as if Daniel's death was just a passing breeze. She wore expensive dresses, applied meticulous makeup, and left the house early in the morning. In the evenings, when I returned, she was often gone. When I asked, she responded with irritation, "It's just work, you don't need to worry about it." I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe there was still something between us worth salvaging. But deep down, I knew the truth was lurking somewhere, waiting to be revealed. The distance between us grew more apparent every day. I lived quietly, trying to hold on to memories of Daniel, while Amanda seemed to exist in another world, a world of hotel lights, lavish parties, and the men she once compared me to. I started noticing unusual signs. One day, while checking our joint account, I saw large expenses, bills from a fancy restaurant in downtown Wichita, plane tickets to Miami, and a 5-star hotel I had never set foot in. I asked Amanda, keeping my tone gentle to avoid angering her, "What are these charges, honey?" She looked at me, a flicker of unease in her eyes before she gave a faint smile. "Just work expenses. Don't worry." But her voice wasn't convincing, and her eyes avoided mine. I stayed silent, not confronting her. Not because I didn't suspect anything, but because I was afraid. I feared that if I dug deeper, I'd uncover something I couldn't bear. I still held onto a fragile thread of hope that Amanda, the woman I once loved deeply, still had some affection left for me, for this family. But with each passing day, that hope faded. I began to watch her, not because I wanted to control her, but because I needed the truth. I checked her messages, reviewed payment histories, and noticed the time she left the house with a small suitcase, claiming she was going on a short business trip. One Saturday morning, I returned home after a late night at work. The house was quiet, not a sound, and Amanda was nowhere to be seen. I stepped into the living room where faint sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a stack of papers on the table. My heart pounded as I realized it was a divorce filing. On top, a brief handwritten note from Amanda. "Grayson, I think we should end this. I'm sorry." I stood there, my hands trembling as I held the papers, feeling like the world was collapsing again. I opened the file, flipping through the pages, but my eyes blurred, unable to read. Then, driven by a gut feeling, I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. The screen displayed zero balance. All the money I had saved for Daniel for this home was gone. At that moment, my phone lit up with a social media notification. Amanda just posted an update. My heart tightened. I tapped the screen and an image that left me stunned appeared. Amanda in a white dress, standing on a Miami beach, beaming with a radiant smile next to a tall young man, his arm around her as if she belonged to him. The caption was brief: freedom and happiness. I stared at the screen, my heart feeling like it was being crushed. Below the photo, her friends flooded the post with congratulations and cheers, as if Amanda had just escaped a prison. No one mentioned Daniel. No one mentioned me. I dug deeper and the truth hit me like a punch to the face. The man in the photo was Benjamin Caldwell, a wealthy young entrepreneur who frequently appeared at the events Amanda organized at the hotel. They had been involved for a while, and now, with Daniel barely gone, Amanda was openly flaunting their relationship as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I sat there in the empty house, a mix of shock and pain overwhelming me. My son had just passed away, the grief still raw, and yet my wife, the woman I trusted and loved, had turned her back on me to chase another man. I held Daniel's drawing, tears falling unconsciously. I cried, not for Amanda, but for Daniel, for the boy who dreamed of a happy family I couldn't preserve. I cried for myself, for the years I endured and held back only to be met with this brazen betrayal. Out there, Wichita remained peaceful with its oak-lined streets and the sound of the wind rustling through distant wheat fields. But inside me, everything had shattered. Daniel was gone. Amanda had betrayed me, and I knew that if I wanted answers, I had to confront the last people in this story. The Collins family. I drove my old pickup truck to Charles and Linda Collins' mansion, located in the most expensive part of Wichita. Their house was grandiose, with white marble columns and a meticulously tended garden, as if designed to flaunt their status to the world. I rang the doorbell, my heart heavy. I wasn't here to beg or plead. I just wanted to know why. Why Amanda could turn her back on me so quickly, why she chose to end things this way. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't find sympathy. Charles opened the door, his eyes as cold and sharp as ever. He was dressed in a silk shirt, holding a glass of wine, as if I'd interrupted his leisurely afternoon. "Grayson," he said, his voice drawn out, "what are you doing here?" I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "I want to talk about Amanda and about us." He smirked and stepped aside to let me in. Inside, Linda was seated on the sofa, dressed extravagantly as if preparing for a gala. Chase, Amanda's younger brother, was there too, scrolling through his phone with an indifferent expression. When Linda saw me, she raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "Oh, Grayson, what a surprise. I thought you'd be at home, packing your things to leave our house." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger rising within me. "Amanda's gone," I said, my voice steady but firm. She left divorce papers and emptied our joint account. I want to know if she said anything to you, and why she did this." Charles let out a loud laugh that echoed through the lavish room. "You're really surprised? Amanda leaving you was the best decision she's ever made. Did you think you could keep her with that dead-end job at the finance department and that beat-up pickup truck?" He stepped closer, eyeing me up and down as if I were a worn-out piece of furniture. "You were never worthy of my daughter. She needs a real man like Benjamin Caldwell, not a freeloader like you." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to scream, to tell him I wasn't the useless man they thought I was. But I stayed silent, letting him continue. Linda stood up, joining her husband, her voice sweet but cutting like a knife. "Grayson, you should be thanking us for giving you a roof over your head. Without the Collins family, where would you be? Back at your parents' rundown farm?" She laughed, a laugh dripping with contempt. "You should know your place." Chase, finally looking up from his phone, chimed in with a mocking tone. "Hey, brother-in-law, or rather ex-brother-in-law, don't you see how pathetic you are? My sister's found someone better, and here you are, bothering our family. Just go, Grayson. Don't make things worse." I stood there, in the opulent room of the Collins home, feeling as if I'd been stripped bare before them. Humiliation surged within me, hot and bitter. I looked at Charles, Linda, then Chase, these people who saw me as a stain on their perfect world. I realized I hadn't just lost Daniel, hadn't just lost Amanda, but this family, the people I once tried to fit in with, had betrayed me in the cruelest way. They didn't see me as a person, only as a failure to be trampled upon. I turned and walked out of that house carrying an indescribable sense of humiliation. As the door slammed shut behind me, I heard Charles' laughter echo like a final stab. But inside me, a fire burned fiercer than ever. I swore to myself, to Daniel, that the Collins family would pay. They would see that Grayson Reed was not the weak, useless man they thought he was. I climbed into my old pickup truck, the engine rumbling as I started it. The road stretching out toward the outskirts of Wichita lay before me, the golden wheat fields glowing under the sunset, pulling me back to a distant place where I once belonged. I didn't drive to the Collins house, the place where I had lived for years as an unwelcome tenant. Instead, I wandered, letting the wheels guide me through familiar country roads, where memories of my childhood rushed back like the wind sweeping through the fields. I was born in a rural area hundreds of miles from Wichita, where endless wheat fields stretched to the horizon. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where each day began with the crow of a rooster and ended with the faint glow of the moon in the sky. My family lived in a simple wooden house, its tin roof rattling whenever it rained. The house had little more than a few pieces of worn furniture and a small fireplace that my mother always kept burning to warm the cold winter nights. But in that house, I never felt lacking because it was filled with love. My father, Weston Reed, was a hard-working farmer. He was tall, with broad shoulders and strong hands, but his eyes were always gentle when he looked at my mother and me. Every morning he rose before dawn, heading to the fields with his old tractor, which he jokingly called his old friend. He worked the land passed down through generations, a barren patch that was nonetheless the pride of our family. When I was young, I once asked him, "Why don't you sell the land to make life easier?" He smiled, ruffled my hair, and said, "Grayson, this land is the lifeblood of our family. Selling it would be like selling our pride." I didn't fully understand his words then, but I knew he lived for this land, for my mother and for me. My mother, Valeria Reed, was the heart of our family. She had brown hair tied neatly back, her hands calloused from farm work and selling produce at the market. Every week, she loaded baskets of potatoes, corn, and wheat onto an old cart and walked 5 kilometers to the village market. I'd trail behind her, helping set up the stall, watching her smile at everyone, even when she sold nothing all day. She always said, "Grayson, as long as you live honestly and work hard, everything will be okay." She never complained, though I knew the years of hardship had etched lines on her face. Though we were poor, our family never lacked love. In the evenings, when the moonlight illuminated the fields, we gathered around a small dining table, sharing simple meals. Sometimes just boiled potatoes and vegetables from my mother's garden. My father told stories of his youth. My mother sang Kansas folk songs in her warm, low voice, and I sat there dreaming of a future where I could give them a better life. I didn't want them to work themselves to exhaustion. I didn't want my mother to walk in the scorching sun to sell a few bundles of greens. I wanted them to be proud of me. I was the smartest kid in our village school, always at the top of my class despite walking 5 kilometers to get there. My teachers praised my sharp mind, but I knew my success came from persistence. I studied by the light of an oil lamp, sitting at an old wooden table in a house that shook with every gust of wind. I dreamed of escaping poverty, not because I was ashamed of my family, but because I wanted my parents to rest, to live in a house that didn't leak when it rained. I earned a scholarship to college, leaving the wheat fields for Wichita, where I began my journey. I studied finance, worked day and night, and slowly built a new life. But to the Collins family, my humble origins were an indelible stain. They saw me as unworthy, a farmer who got lucky marrying their daughter. They didn't know that over the years I had been quietly working, not just to support my small family, but to build something greater. I studied markets late into the night while Amanda and Daniel slept. I invested in stocks, real estate, and projects no one suspected. I didn't boast, didn't need anyone to know. My portfolio grew steadily, and if I sold everything, the sum would stun the entire Collins family. But more importantly, I held a significant stake in Charles Collins' real estate company, through an anonymous holding company he was completely unaware of. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road, gazing out at the sprawling wheat fields before me. The sunset bathed the sky in gold, just as it had when I was a boy running through those fields. I remembered the afternoons when my father taught me to drive the tractor, the way my mother hugged me when I cried after being teased as a country kid. I recalled my father's words. "Grayson, you may be poor in money, but never be poor in pride." Those words shaped me, patient, quiet, but resolute. I had lived by them, enduring the Collins family's contempt, holding back for Daniel, for the dream of a happy family. But now, as the Collins family trampled on my pride, I knew I could no longer stay silent. I gripped the steering wheel, anger mixing with a cold clarity. The Collins family thought they knew everything about me, that I was just a failure, a lowly clerk living off their generosity. But they didn't know that the Grayson Reed they despised had been preparing for years, building a small financial empire in the shadows. They didn't know I held the power to topple their perfect world. I started the truck, my gaze steady. The road ahead was no longer a path back to the cold Collins house. It was a road to a new beginning, a beginning where I would reclaim my honor, where I would make those who looked down on me pay. I thought of Daniel, of his wheat field drawing, and I told myself, "Son, I'll make you proud." I returned to the house, once a home for me and Daniel, now just an empty shell. I walked to the living room table where Amanda's divorce papers still lay, a stark reminder of her betrayal. I picked them up, flipping through each page, and the aching in my heart gradually gave way to a clear, cold truth. I grabbed a pen and signed the final page with a decisive stroke. That signature didn't just end my marriage to Amanda, it was a farewell to a painful past. I was no longer the submissive husband, the man who bowed his head to mockery. I was Grayson Reed, and I would not let myself be trampled on again. I gathered a few personal belongings, an old jacket, some finance books, and most importantly, Daniel's drawings. I carefully folded the picture of the wheat field where the 3 of us held hands and placed it in a small box. I took nothing that belonged to the Collins family, not a single item from this lavish house. They didn't belong to me, and I didn't need them. Before leaving, I stepped into Daniel's room. The faint smell of colored pencils and drawing paper lingered, as if he were still there, smiling at me. I sat on his bed, touching the blanket he used to sleep under, and closed my eyes. I remembered the evenings I read him stories, his clear laughter as he told me about his drawings. "Dad, I'll draw the whole world for you," he once said. And I had laughed, never imagining that world would slip away so soon. I stood up, wiping away the tear rolling down my cheek. "Goodbye, son," I whispered, as if Daniel could still hear me. Then I walked out of the house, closing the door behind me. As I stepped down the path to my truck, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from the Collins family's contempt. Free from holding together a marriage that had long been dead. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I moved to a small apartment in downtown Wichita, a simple place with a window overlooking the bustling street. The apartment had little more than a single bed, a small desk, and a bookshelf. But to me, it was a fresh start. I placed Daniel's drawing on the shelf next to my desk, so he would always be with me. Each time I looked at those scribbled lines, I felt a surge of strength rising within me. The next day, I took action. I contacted my lawyer, Harold Bennett, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a wealth of experience. I met him at a small cafe where the aroma of roasted coffee mingled with the soft hum of jazz music. "Harold," I said, my voice low but firm, "I need you to help me consolidate all my investments and subsidiaries. It's time I put them to use." Harold raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee cup down. "Are you sure, Grayson? This is no small move. If you go public, there's no turning back." I nodded, my gaze unwavering. "I don't need a way back. I want the Collins family to know they were wrong about me." Harold smiled, a hint of admiration in his expression. "All right, my friend. Show me what you've got." In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly with Harold and my financial team. I consolidated the investments I had quietly built over the years. Stocks, real estate, and startup ventures I had funded under anonymous names. But my trump card, the one I had kept secret even from Amanda, was the significant stake I held in Charles Collins' real estate company. I had acquired it years ago when his company faced difficulties through an anonymous holding company that no one, not even Charles, knew was mine. Now I was ready to wield that power. My plan was clear: no more patience, no more bowing my head. I would reveal the truth and show the Collins family who Grayson Reed really was. I wasn't doing this out of hatred, but for honor, my honor, and for Daniel, the boy who believed his dad was the strongest man in the world. My spirit began to change. In the early days after Daniel's death, I was a hollow shell, living only to endure the pain. But now I found a new purpose. The pain was no longer a burden, but a fire pushing me forward. I was no longer the freeloader the Collins family mocked. I was a man with a clear goal, a father determined to write a new chapter in life. Not just for myself, but so that Daniel, wherever he was, could smile. Each night in my small apartment, I opened my laptop, reviewed financial reports, and prepared for the next step. I knew this battle wouldn't be easy. The Collins family wasn't to be underestimated, but I was ready. I held a power they never suspected, and I would use it to make them pay for the years they trampled on me. As the day of the annual meeting of Collins Real Estate approached, I felt a quiet excitement simmering within me. It wasn't the gloating of a vengeful man, but the feeling of a man ready to reclaim what was rightfully his. I had spent weeks preparing, working with Harold and my financial team to ensure everything was in place. I reviewed every number, every document, every piece of evidence I had quietly gathered about Charles Collins. Shady transactions, funds he siphoned from the company to pay personal debts. Each piece of paper, each line of data was a bullet, and I was ready to fire. That morning, I stood before the mirror in my small apartment, feeling truly myself for the first time in years. I wore a tailored black suit, not the cheap clothes the Collins family had once mocked. I combed my hair neatly, looking into my own eyes in the mirror, eyes no longer weary or submissive, but sharp and resolute. I picked up Daniel's drawing, resting my hand on the scribbled lines of the wheat field, and whispered, "Son, today I'm doing this for you." The meeting was held at a luxurious hotel in downtown Wichita, where gleaming glass windows reflected the sunlight and expensive cars lined the parking lot. I walked into the grand conference hall where the shareholders of Collins Real Estate had gathered. The air was thick with tension and hushed conversations. I passed curious glances, some recognizing me but not daring to speak. I was no longer Grayson Reed with the beat-up pickup truck and worn-collared shirt. I was a different man, polished, confident, and ready to turn the tables. Charles Collins stood at the front of the hall, chatting with a group of shareholders, his smug smile ever present. Linda sat in the front row, dressed extravagantly, her eyes scanning the crowd like a queen. Chase, Amanda's brother, stood nearby, phone in hand, his usual arrogance on display. When I entered, all three turned to look at me. Charles furrowed his brow, then let out a loud laugh that echoed through the hall. "Grayson," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What are you doing here? Did you wander into the wrong room? Or do you think you can beg for a job at my company?" A few people around him chuckled, but I didn't flinch. Linda stood, stepping closer, her eyes icy. "You really have no shame. You've already lost Amanda and now you want to bother us here?" Chase chimed in, his tone mocking. "Brother-in-law, or should I say ex-brother-in-law, are you here to beg for money to buy a new truck? That old rust bucket probably didn't even make it here." I stood tall, looking directly into Charles's eyes. "I'm here as a shareholder of the company," I said, my voice calm but firm. Charles threw his head back and laughed as if he'd heard a ridiculous joke. "A shareholder? You? You scrape together a few measly shares and think you belong here?" He turned to an employee nearby. "Call security. Get him out. We don't have time for this nonsense." But before the employee could move, I raised my hand, signaling him to stop. "I suggest you check the shareholder list before you do that, Mr. Collins." My voice was cold, unwavering. Charles frowned but motioned for his assistant to bring up the shareholder list on the large screen. The hall fell silent, all eyes on me. When the list updated, my name appeared, Grayson Reed, holding 12% of the shares among the top major shareholders, with enough voting power to influence the company's key decisions. Murmurs erupted in the hall. Grayson Reed, the Collins' failed husband. How did he get those shares? Charles stood frozen, his face shifting from smugness to shock. Linda clutched her husband's arm, her eyes panicked. Chase, furious, stepped toward me, pointing in my face. "What kind of stunt are you pulling, Grayson? Who do you think you are, showing up here with this scam?" But before he could say more, an older shareholder, Mr. Peterson, stood, his voice stern. "Mr. Collins, please maintain order. This is a shareholder meeting, not a place to settle personal grudges." Tension hung heavy in the air. The meeting's moderator then confirmed the updated shareholder list, with my name prominently listed as a significant stakeholder. "Mr. Reed," he said, "as a major shareholder, you have the right to speak." I stepped onto the podium, my gaze sweeping across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm but commanding, "I'm here not only as a shareholder, but to bring to light some truths about how Mr. Charles Collins has been running this company." I signaled to Harold, who had prepared a set of documents. On the large screen, numbers and files began to appear. Shady transactions, funds Charles had siphoned from the company to pay personal debts, and fraudulent contracts used to cover up his embezzlement. The hall erupted. Shareholders whispered, some shook their heads, others looked at Charles with suspicion. Mr. Peterson stood again, his voice trembling with anger. "Mr. Collins, are these allegations true?" Charles stammered, trying to defend himself, but his voice was weak, unconvincing. This is just a misunderstanding. I'll explain." But I didn't let him continue. "No need for explanations, Mr. Collins," I interrupted. "These documents have already been sent to the authorities. I trust they'll get to the bottom of this." I looked straight into his eyes, unflinching. "You've run this company like your personal playground, and now it's time you take responsibility." Some shareholders, already dissatisfied with Charles' leadership, began to speak up. Mr. Peterson slammed his hand on the table. "I propose we add a vote of no confidence to the agenda." If these allegations are true, Mr. Collins is no longer fit to serve as chairman. A chorus of agreement echoed through the hall. After a brief discussion with the secretary, the moderator announced, "We will proceed with the vote immediately." Charles stood there, his face pale, his hands trembling. Linda gripped his arm tightly, her eyes frantic, while Chase quietly stepped back, his arrogance gone. As the vote took place, the result was clear. Charles was forced to resign. The hall fell silent, save for the murmurs of the shareholders. The Collins family stood frozen, bitterly watching the freeloader they once despised turn the tables. I stood there, looking directly into Charles' eyes, and for the first time I saw fear in them. They had no way to control me anymore. As I left the conference hall, the midday sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, casting streaks of light across the hotel corridor. I walked with my head held high, feeling as if a heavy burden had been lifted. I wasn't gloating or smiling triumphantly. I only felt relief, as if I had finally paid off a long-standing debt of honor. But I knew this wasn't the end. News of the meeting spread like wildfire across a dry field. Local Wichita papers, followed by larger news outlets, buzzed with headlines. Grayson Reed, the despised husband, topples the Collins empire. They wrote about me like a dark fairy tale. An ordinary man scorned by his wife's family, revealed as a secretive investor with the financial power to oust Charles Collins from his throne. I read those words on my phone in my small apartment and shook my head. They didn't know the full story, the pain of losing Daniel, the years I endured in silence, and the fire that had smoldered within me. That night, my phone buzzed incessantly. Amanda called, one call after another. Messages flooded in, ranging from "Please, Grayson, please answer me. We need to talk," to angry outbursts. "Why did you hide this from me? Who do you think you are?" I stared at the screen as it lit up with her words, but I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to her. Amanda had made her choice when she abandoned me, when she stood silently as her parents humiliated me at Daniel's funeral. She didn't deserve a single explanation from me. 3 days later, I was at the finance department office reviewing documents when the door swung open. Amanda stood there, her face gaunt, her eyes red and swollen, stripped of the haughty glamour of the woman who had once beamed beside her lover on a Miami beach. She wore a simple dress, her hair hastily tied back as if she had just stepped off a plane and rushed here. "Grayson," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and panic. "We need to talk. Right now." I looked up, my gaze cold. "Amanda, what do you want?" I called her by her name, no longer honey as I once had. The distance between us was now an unbridgeable chasm. She stepped inside, closed the door, and stood before my desk. "Why, Grayson? Why did you hide it from me? You're a major shareholder in my father's company. You have money, power, and yet you let me think you were a nobody." Her voice rose, as if she were the victim in this story. I stood, meeting her eyes directly. "I didn't hide anything, Amanda. I just didn't boast. I worked, I built, because I wanted to keep this family together. For Daniel. But what about you? What did you do besides compare me to wealthy men? Besides turn your back on me when I needed you most?" My voice was calm, but each word cut like a blade. Amanda stepped back as if my words had struck her. "Grayson, I didn't know. If you had told me, things could have been different. We could have shared this glory together." She tried to smile, but it was forced, artificial. I looked at her, feeling as if I were seeing a stranger. This wasn't the Amanda I had loved, the one I held hands with under the Kansas moonlight. She was an opportunist, grasping at something she thought she'd missed. "Glory?" I repeated, my voice low. "You think I did this for glory? You think I wanted to live like your family, flaunting wealth and power? I did it for Daniel, for our little family. But you, Amanda, you betrayed me. You stood there letting your parents humiliate me at our son's funeral. You walked away with another man the moment Daniel was gone. Don't mention Daniel to sway me." Amanda burst into tears, tears streaming down her face. "Grayson, I'm sorry. I was wrong. For Daniel, for our family, can we start over? She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, my gaze unwavering. Don't mention Daniel. I cut her off, my voice like ice. His memory only makes me less able to forgive you. You chose your path, Amanda. Now live with it. I turned back to my desk, signaling the conversation was over. Amanda stood there, helpless, her tears falling in vain. She tried to say something more, but her voice choked, unable to form words. Finally, she turned and left the office, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I sat down, looking out the window at Wichita's bustling streets filled with people and cars. I didn't feel victorious or joyful. I only felt a clear sense of finality. Amanda and the Collins family had once been part of my life, but now they no longer had the power to hurt me. I had closed that door, and none of them could walk through it again. In the days following the shareholder meeting, Wichita seemed to tremble with the aftershocks. News of Charles Collins' downfall spread across newspapers, from local rags to major business outlets. His reputation, once a symbol of real estate prowess in Kansas, was now reduced to ashes. Business partners who once fawned over him at lavish parties turned their backs. Contracts were canceled, invitations to elite events dried up. Charles, the man who once stood at the pinnacle of power, now faced rigorous financial investigations. The authorities dug into the shady transactions I had exposed, and each day, another of his secrets was dragged into the light. In a desperate bid to salvage his situation, Charles was forced to sell off assets, opulent mansions, luxury cars, and even the land he once boasted as his family legacy. But nothing could restore his shattered reputation. He became the talk of Wichita, not as a successful businessman, but as a greedy man unmasked. Linda Collins, the woman who once prided herself on her prestigious art gallery, wasn't spared from the storm. Her gallery, where Wichita's elite once gathered to splurge on expensive paintings, now stood empty. The wealthy friends who used to flatter her now avoided her, as if the Collins family's failure was a contagious disease. Linda tried to host a few exhibitions to salvage her reputation, but no one came. I heard she had to close the gallery and sell her beloved art collection to pay off debts. The arrogant smile that once made me feel small was now just a distant memory. Chase, Amanda's brother, who had once mocked me with venomous words, fared no better. Without the backing of his powerful father, his business, a chain of high-end fashion stores, quickly collapsed. Debts piled up, customers turned away, and Chase, once a playboy prince, now faced creditors knocking at his door daily. I never saw him again, but I heard he left Wichita, carrying his shame and an uncertain future. As for Amanda, she fell into an abyss of her own making. After returning from Miami, she tried to maintain her glamorous facade, but no one saw her the same way anymore. Friends and colleagues who once admired her now mocked her behind her back. The woman who left her husband for a rich lover, they whispered, their voices dripping with sarcasm. Benjamin Caldwell, the young entrepreneur she had flaunted on social media, abandoned her as soon as the news about the Collins family broke. To him, Amanda was just a decorative accessory, and when her shine faded, he had no reason to stay. Amanda lost everything. Her social status, respect, and the illusions of a luxurious life she had traded her family to chase. While the Collins family unraveled, I began rebuilding my life. I bought a modest house in the suburbs of Wichita, not to show off, but to create a place I could truly call home. The house sat on a quiet street surrounded by wheat fields that reminded me of my childhood. It wasn't as grand as the Collins mansion, but it was warm, with large windows welcoming sunlight and a small garden where I could plant sunflowers, Daniel's favorite flower. I brought my parents, Weston and Valeria Reed, from their struggling farm to live with me. When I drove to the old wooden house where I grew up, they stood on the porch, their eyes filled with disbelief. "Grayson, you've made us proud, just as you always said you would," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. My father, a man of few words, simply patted my shoulder, but I saw pride in his eyes. For the first time in years, my parents could live comfortably, free from the daily grind of scraping by. I took them out in my new car, bought them things they never dared dream of. A warm sweater for my mother, a sturdy pair of shoes for my father. Seeing them smile, I felt a lightness in my heart, as if I had fulfilled the promise I made to myself as a boy running through the wheat fields. I continued to grow my investment career, but I kept my lifestyle simple. I didn't need flashy cars or extravagant suits. I still preferred sitting on the porch in the evenings, listening to the wind rustle through the fields, and remembering the hard but love-filled days of my past. I worked not to prove anything to anyone, but to build a secure future, to ensure that those I loved would never suffer. But some nights, sitting alone in my quiet house, I wondered if things could have been different. If I had revealed my wealth from the start, could Daniel have been saved? Would Amanda have stayed loyal instead of chasing her illusions of grandeur? Would the Collins family have looked at me with respect instead of contempt and insults? Those questions haunted me, but I knew there were no answers. Daniel was gone, and nothing could bring him back. Amanda and the Collins family had chosen their paths, and I couldn't change the past. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves began to fall gently on the suburban roads of Wichita, I drove to the cemetery. In my hands was a bouquet of sunflowers, Daniel's favorite flower. He once told me as we sat in the backyard, "Dad, sunflowers are beautiful because they always turn toward the sun, rain, or shine." I smiled at the memory, but the smile was tinged with pain. I parked beside the old iron gate of the cemetery and walked along the gravel path, each step heavier with the flood of memories. The cemetery was quiet, with only the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant chirping of birds. I found Daniel's grave, a small stone marker etched deeply with the words, "Daniel Reed, our little angel." On the stone was a photo of him, his innocent smile and clear blue eyes, looking as if he were still watching me, still calling Dad, like he did when he was alive. I knelt down, placing the sunflowers before the grave, my hand touching the cold stone. I traced the carved letters of his name, feeling as if I were touching a part of my own heart. I didn't cry. My tears had run dry in the days I held Daniel in the hospital, when he took his final breath in my arms. Now there was only a quiet stillness, a longing etched into every breath. I sat by the grave, gazing at Daniel's photo for a long time. His smile was like sunlight, piercing through the fog of grief in my heart. "Son," I whispered, "I did it. I stood up the way you always wanted me to. Are you proud of me?" I imagined Daniel somewhere, holding his colored pencils, drawing a vibrant wheat field. I imagined him smiling, nodding at me, and in that moment I felt a peace I hadn't found in a long time. I had lost Daniel, but he lived on in me. In every decision I made, every step I took, in the fire that carried me through my darkest days. I sat there, letting the autumn breeze tousle my hair, carrying the scent of Kansas's earth and sky. I thought about my journey, from a barefoot boy running through wheat fields to a man despised in his own family, and now a man free, living true to his pride. I had turned pain into strength, not for revenge, but to prove that no one could trample on me forever. My life story isn't one of triumph or vengeance. It's a message to anyone who's ever been looked down upon, ever been crushed. Don't let anyone define your worth. Live fiercely, hold on to your dignity, and turn pain into the strength to keep going. I did it, not just for myself, but for Daniel, for my parents, and for those who believed in me. I stood, placing my hand on the gravestone one last time, a silent promise to my son. "I'll keep going, Daniel. I promise." Then I walked away from the cemetery, carrying the light of his smile. Ahead of me, Wichita stretched out with roads leading to the future. I knew I would never forget Daniel, but I also knew he wanted me to live, fiercely, fully, the way he had loved life.